in terms of what goes into a letter of recommendation, you might have heard of this concept of transferable skills. So these are things like people skills or organizational abilities or verbal communication abilities or motivation, capacity to be independent, problem-solving ability, critical thinking skills. These are generalized skill sets that no matter what kind of job you end up doing in the world, you use some of these core skills, and you can learn them in one context like school or internships and then carry them with you to different jobs or contexts because they all kind of apply. So transferable skills can be transferred between different occupations or lines of work, whereas that's kind of different from field-specific skills like how to run analytical statistics in SPSS or Excel. Like that might be useful for some jobs, but utterly useless for other jobs and not needed because they're specific to a certain line of work. So these transferable skills, you want to be able to show search committees in your application materials as well as in your interview that you have these skills, these transferable skills. And some of them are particularly important for success as a graduate student. If you Google around for like transferable skills lists, you can see examples of additional ones than the ones I named. And just by thinking about the field of counseling psychology and the fact that there's research and taking classes and doing therapy, you could probably start to guess pretty quick what kind of transferable skills are important. But I'll try and name a few that come to mind here as particularly salient to the counseling psychology PhD context. And I bring this up because as a part of your application, you want your letter writers in what they say about you to be able to talk about how you have these transferable skills, and when they claim that, oh, this person is very strongly motivated or has great attention to detail as transferable skills, that just saying that is meaningless really, because it's just taking their word. Instead, what makes that sort of claim meaningful is when they back it up with a concrete example of how you demonstrated that skill in the context of your work with them. So here's an example. If someone's asking me for a letter of recommendation, and they were hoping that as a part of my letter, I talk about this person's interpersonal skills, then I might say in my letter, this student has strong interpersonal skills. For example, during class, the student frequently contributes insightful comments to discussion, but also gives time to other students so that they can make contributions and doesn't hog the airtime, and is also very collaborative in how this person dialogues with classmates during role plays and during group discussions from what I've seen. It would be a little more concise than what I said, but you can kind of see how the letter of recommendation kind of has this sequence where they say, this student has this quality, and let me provide evidence for why I say that. So that sort of quality evidence sort of structure feels convincing and substantive to people who are reading your letters. So ideally, my sense is that your letter writers, when they're writing you a strong letter of recommendation, will try and follow that sort of structure. I know that I do when I'm writing letters of rec on behalf of students. Other professors may have different opinions on that, and like I said, get lots of opinions as you're preparing to, make yourself competitive for graduate school and during the application process and all that. But that's my perspective about what can strengthen a letter. So ideally, your letter writers know about this concept, and they're mentioning these transferable skills that are key to successful graduate study in counseling psych. and not only do they know these qualities, but they're ready to assert them on your behalf and talk about the ways in which you've demonstrated them in a convincing way. In terms of some transferable skills that can be particularly important when it comes to our field, and maybe I'll mention some field-specific stuff too that might be less relevant for, say, accounting. Okay, some of these things. First of all, creativity. If you want to do research, you have to have a creative bone in your body. You have to be able to think about what research has been done, think about possible ways to extend that research, link this idea to this idea over here, or this theory applied to this novel context. You got to be able to kind of say, what do we know, and how might we be able to do something different here or new? So you got to be able to brainstorm and come up with stuff. And when I say creative, I'm not saying you got to be an artist and good with pencils and crayons. No, it's the ability to think creatively and generate novel ideas. So that is a skill that we hope graduate students have, because otherwise it'll be really hard for that person to take the lead on thinking of study ideas, which is something that you don't have to do really early on when you're learning to become a researcher, but you're growing into that role, and you want to have kind of the raw ingredients, the raw capacity to be able to exercise that creativity in this domain. And I actually know some professors who say that that ability to be creative is one of the most important factors that they look for in a student. They feel that it can be such a accurate predictor of someone's potential. Some people say that, and I can see why. In terms of other transferable skills, another key piece is that you demonstrate professionalism. And that's kind of a broad term, and there's a few kind of sub-terms under that. So when I say professionalism, it means that you're responsible. So if you promise to carry out a task, or you have some responsibilities, that you follow through on that. So you do what you need to do to follow through on your obligations. And when you mess up, you're accountable to that messing up, and you vow and take concrete steps to improve and avoid similar mistakes in the future. It also includes dressing professionally, speaking in an appropriate manner, so probably not cussing in front of people, because while I cuss a fair bit, that can not be so attractive to certain folks. So being careful with your language, and that includes not only around cussing, but around how you talk about people who are culturally different from yourself. So particularly in counseling psychology, one of the values that counseling psychologists tend to subscribe to is that we believe in the respect and dignity of all individuals, and in the importance of us bringing a humility and curiosity to learning about people who are different from us in terms of racial, ethnic background, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, ability status, geography, nationality, immigrant status, religion, all of these pieces that make up our social location, our multiple identities. We value inclusivity and equality and equity, and being aware of privileges we may have, power we may have, and how marginalization and oppression can be built into society as well as practiced by individuals on an interpersonal level. So in our field, anything in terms of talking disparagingly about other groups or being negative can certainly cast you in a negative light, and can make you seem like someone who is bigoted and perhaps more importantly, kind of unaware of that. So being respectful and kind in how you talk about yourself and other people, particularly those who are different, is an important personal attribute, I think, in many counseling psychologists' eyes. Now, again, they wouldn't say in their letter, like, this person did not make disparaging comments, but they would talk about your professionalism. And one piece of what kind of informs how professional you seem are pieces like that. Other related stuff that goes under professionalism is attention to detail. What can be frustrating for a supervisor is when you're given a task, particularly a more complex task, and you kind of do it, you kind of like do a B+ effort, but you didn't really read the instructions carefully or go through it cautiously and methodically. You just kind of were haphazard, and it's mostly good, but there was some stuff that you missed. That sort of lack of attention to detail can be very costly when it comes to research and practice, and so that can be a turnoff to people. So if you can demonstrate a carefulness and a thoroughness in how you do your work, that can enhance what we call your attention to detail, and therefore how professional you seem. Other pieces of professionalism include how you interact with your peers, how you interact with people who you may be supervising, if you're maybe a lab supervisor and you have people under you, so to speak, and how you interact with people who have more professional power, who you're in a power relationship with, like graduate students in your lab, your supervisor, or staff at the or senior staff at the place that you work. So the way you interact with people is noticed and can be commented on. So this includes showing a respect to those who are more experienced and advanced or hold positions of power over you. What can sometimes happen is that students want to be friendly or open or kind of interpersonal, and so they will kind of interact with some of their supervisors as if they were one of their friends. So kind of this really sort of informal, overly informal way. And that can be felt as disrespectful by certain supervisors. They can feel like you were supposed to show some respect and maybe a little bit of deference and kind of not being oversharing with them, and maybe by crossing that line you kind of can feel unprofessional. So, you don't want to be scared or non-communicative or a servile person with them, but you don't want to be overly familiar either, or treat them like a buddy, or talk to them like a buddy, or be informal in that way, unless they communicate to you that that's how they'd like to interact with you. Some professors really like that. I know for me, I'm somewhere in the middle, where I like being able to interact with people and use a lot of humor and kind of be low-key, but I also like to feel respected and honored for my role in the organization or my role in the lab, and that I have some wisdom that comes from doing this work, and I want to have that wisdom and that kind of respect acknowledged a little bit, and kind of honored. So that's a piece I'll say around that professionalism as well. What else? You've got these other transferable skills. You've got like oral skills in terms of your ability to speak and communicate clearly, as well as your written skills. So in terms of any papers you write or other kind of written products, and this includes, importantly, email. Professors, I think, by and large, really appreciate it when students do not use text speak and they're not informal in their emails. They say, hello, Dr. X, comma, space, and then some concise sentences with appropriate punctuation and full sentences and grammar, and then, at the end, sincerely, and then your name, and then including like an appropriate signature box at the bottom of your email. So a professionally written correspondence that will communicate to them your professionalism. Whereas if you're informal and you don't capitalize stuff and you miss punctuation and you don't write your name at the bottom and you don't even address them, or you don't put a descriptive subject header in or no subject line in, that can be experienced as being unprofessional and overly informal, and can leave people with a bad taste. So that stuff all goes towards their perception of your writing abilities, your expressive and ability to express yourself in writing. Other pieces include your motivation, drive, initiative, independence, autonomy. All these sort of words get at your ability to be a self-starter. Your ability to not be totally independent on your supervisor or team members, fellow students or fellow research lab partners or whatnot. Because ideally a supervisor wants to say, hey, I want your help with doing this, or here's your task. They explain it a bit, and then as you're listening to them, you're thinking critically about, okay, I understand this, okay, I understand this, I understand her on this and that, but I'm not so sure about this. Oh, I should ask for clarification on that. You're actively listening to what the task is, and you are ready to ask for clarification on those things that are unclear, either then or once you've started to do the task and then questions have come up. You're ready to seek out answers to the pieces you don't know about, but when you have what you need, you do it. You go forward, you move on it, and you use time management and you use appropriate motivation. You do what you got to do to follow through on the task that is your task, that you are assigned, that's your job. What supervisors don't want to have to do is nag you or have to remind you or check in, hey, did you do this thing? Or hey, where are you at with this? Or hey, we said you'd be ready on this date, but it doesn't look like you're there. Or need nudging, or that you forget things, or that you need pump-up speeches or whatever. Like occasionally that, in the natural course of things, maybe that'll happen once in a great while, but supervisors want people who can self-regulate and manage themselves as professionals and students and adults to get done what they need to get done. And when there's things that are getting in the way of them doing that project or task, then they approach their supervisor about that difficulty and they work with the supervisor to get it resolved. So if you have questions about how to do a piece or uncertainties or barriers you face, you address those rather than saying, I don't know this. How I'm going to cope with that is just to not do it, or to procrastinate, or to pretend like I know what I'm going to do and just plow through, and if I ended up doing it wrong, oh well. No. The supervisors don't want that. They want you to be adults and get help on what you need to get help on and make it happen. So that sort of ability to be autonomous. It doesn't mean not needing anybody's help. It means you do your part, and when you need help, you get that help so that you can get the stuff done in a professional manner. So kind of related pieces to that are motivation, that you fuel your own fire to get it done. You're clearly motivated and driven, and they can maybe even see your passion, your desire to engage in this work, to learn, to grow, to thrive, to do your best. They like seeing that fire, that energy, that commitment. That's good stuff for them to see. And initiative is a term we use to describe when someone will do something or offer to do something or initiate something when they weren't explicitly asked to. So they kind of put in the extra time. They take on additional work willingly. They suggest things. That's very helpful. That's very mature. That's exactly what real independent researchers and practitioners do. They can get themselves going and start things. So your ability to show some of that and go above and beyond is a wonderful trait to be able to demonstrate. In terms of some therapy-specific things, there's a few kind of terms that we'd like to see. One is what's called empathy. My understanding of empathy, it's the ability to step into another person's shoes and understand their world and their experience as best you can as that person experienced it based on what that person shares. So you can never be somebody else. You can never know what it's really like to be somebody else, and you never want to pretend that, oh, I know exactly how you feel, because you don't, because it's their life and you know your life. But you can, to some degree, engage in intentionally stepping into their shoes and trying to see the world and experience the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors from that person's unique perspective. That is a basic skill of therapists, because our clients are often very different people, see the world, have problems, and cope in very different ways than we do. And we're not good therapists if we're saying, oh, you're doing that, but why can't you be like me or do it like this? Well, no. Part of that, building that therapeutic relationship, is really being able to get into their shoes and try and understand it from their perspective, and to show the client in what you say and how you act that you're able to step into that, to join with them in that. So that's what we call empathy. And empathy is one of the most important foundational transferable skills that a person needs to become a great therapist. You have to be able to empathize with your clients. And that's just a great life skill, period, if you want to be a loving partner, a good friend. That is a very essential human interpersonal skill to have. So, in the context of any sort of applied clinical experiences you might be having, you would ideally want to be able to show your supervisor your capacity for that empathy, because they want to be able to speak to that. Other kind of related qualities to that, one of them is, I like to call it warmth. So that's it's kind of a positivity, a kindness, a compassion that you bring to how you interact with people. And so that's opposed to being cold or distant or aloof or kind of stuffy professional or hard to read or disconnected or other kind of antonyms like that. So it's a warmth, a kindness that you show towards people, and that showing clients that warmth, that unconditional positive regard, is another really important piece of building a good relationship with a client, as well as building good relationships with people in your life and with supervisors and colleagues at work and all of that. So warmth is another piece. Listening skills is another thing. So your ability to listen and be attentive. So your nonverbals and your eye contact and your body language shows that you're paying attention and you're seeming to care and value what this person across from you is saying. So your ability to attend to the client is shown through that, as well as your ability to, when you're listening to somebody, to do a restatement, for example, to be able to say back to them what you heard them say. So it sounds like you're telling me X, Y, and Z. That would be a restatement. And it shows, importantly, that you heard what they said because you were able to kind of summarize it back to them or reflect back to them. And things like open questions. Oh, what was that like? Or how did that make you feel? Or things like that show, again, that you've been following what they've been saying and are curious about parts and wanting to know more about this piece, or for them to go into more depth on this or that. Those are all kind of listening skills, sometimes called micro skills or helping skills, the basic bread and butter techniques that all therapists use to help clients tell their story and as a manner of helping clients work through their difficulties. What else? Another piece is your ability, your willingness to receive constructive criticism, to receive feedback. So not only to be able to hear people's praise or positive reinforcement for things you do well and saying, thank you, that's very kind of you, and being able to hear and accept that positive feedback. There's also the other side of being willing to receive constructive criticism from somebody, particularly people who do so in an appropriate and a non-malicious way. So people who mean well and deliver it in an appropriate way. It's an important skill. It's so crucial if you want to become a graduate student and you want to become a therapist. You have to be able to take feedback and not be defensive. And let me kind of add some nuance to what I mean by this. Whenever we're told as people that, hey, there's this thing you didn't do as well as you could, or you might want to do this differently, that usually hurts a little bit. It's hard because we try and be competent people and good people, and when somebody says, you weren't as competent as I wanted you to be, that can leave you feeling sad or angry or irritated or anxious. It doesn't feel so good. And the thing is, when you hear constructive criticism, even for me, and I've been doing therapy for like 9 years at this point, I still have a little tiny initial negative emotional blip that comes out of me when I start to hear that feedback. So it's not like I have to eliminate that automatic sort of implicit reaction that I have, because that's a very human thing that I think is built into all of us. Rather, what's important is that you're willing to sit with that momentary feeling and not get so wrapped up or defensive when receiving that feedback. So it's like, okay, I know I'm feeling a little defensive here, but I'm just going to let myself sit with this, and I'm going to continue to value what this person is telling me right now, and I'm going to listen, I'm going to take them seriously, I'm going to express appreciation for this feedback, and I'm going to commit to taking action, assuming the feedback is sound feedback. That is what makes a good therapist trainee, because therapy is really hard. It's really hard in some ways, particularly in the beginning. And good therapists become good because they've gotten tons of constructive criticism, and they were able to hear that criticism and act on it, rather than get defensive or shut down or contradict the person or disagree or say, yeah, I hear that, but what about this? Or here's why I can't do that, or any other sorts of unproductive responses to criticism. What's most professional, and what I encourage you to practice in the context of your work that supervisors can see, is being open to and being non-defensive around feedback. So drinking that in, being appreciative of it, and not taking it as a strike against your personhood or your worth as a person, because that's not, from supervisors who give appropriate feedback, that's not what that's meant to be. It's not meant to be disparaging. It's meant to help you grow. It's because people are invested in your growth and you're getting better and you're becoming your best version of yourself. That's why people ideally give constructive criticism, or at least good supervisors and good instructors do it in that spirit. So you want to return that kindness and that professionalism. You might even, what can be kind of even a next level up, is soliciting that feedback from people. Hey, supervisor, I'm really interested in what you see have been my strong points and strengths, as well as some of my growth edges. Growth edges is a term we use for weaknesses, in that it really emphasizes that this is something that you're not as strong on yet, and it's something that you're going to work on and become better at. So it's very kind of positive, growth-oriented sort of term, and you might think it's all fluff and silly words or whatever, but it makes a difference in that when we use the term growth edge, it's about, here are the things that I'm committed to working on and growing in, and that sort of perspective feels good. That is, I think, ideal. So, soliciting feedback on your strengths, as well as what your growth edges are, how you could improve, any constructive criticism they might have. That shows a great professionalism on your part and a great initiative, because it's tough to get constructive criticism. And so if you, of your own free will, request that and solicit that, that really shows your commitment to growth and becoming a great professional. So that can be another good way of demonstrating that for your supervisors, so that they can then write about that in their letters. Another piece that can be particularly important to practice as well as research is what we call like ethical sensibility, or awareness of and attention to ethics, and kind of that side of thing where you're showing that you're concerned for the welfare of other people and for good rules and regulations being followed. Because when it comes to both research and practice, there's the potential to do harm to people and to violate confidentiality, violate autonomy, to hurt others, to not do things that are in people's best interest. All of these ethical principles and values that we have. You're not going to be an expert on psychologist ethics yet. You're going to have a class on that in graduate school, in fact. But we can demonstrate an ethical sensibility as undergraduates in terms of our integrity as a person. So are we honest? Are we forthright? Do we care about the welfare of others? Are we cautious? Are we, mindful of being appropriate and holding people's confidentiality? And all of those sorts of professional things can go in that attention and respect for ethical considerations. Other things that I can think of are things like time management and organizational ability. So keeping yourself organized and not losing track of things, and doing things in a timely manner. That's important in both research and practice. Other things on the researchy side could include things like the critical thinking ability, the ability to read a research article or think about research in a critical way, in a way that asks questions or looks for limitations or can draw pieces together. Just an ability to think smartly and not take things at face value, to think about them deeply and challenge things when that needs challenging. But of course, doing so in a professional and warm way, rather than doing it to prove a point or show that you're smart or to put others down. Of course, you wouldn't want to show those pieces when it comes to. So I think those are some of the more salient. Oh yeah, another piece in terms of transferable skills is that you work and play well with others, or that's the cheeky way to say it. So your interpersonal skills, your teamwork, your being a team player sort of thing. What can sometimes happen is that people, really smart and otherwise very qualified students, can come across as being selfish or about themselves, or being really focused on the task and being productive, but they kind of don't cultivate and honor their relationships with others, or they're too focused on completing the task, but they'll be demanding with others, or not really so relational, that they can people can worry oh, are they going to be kind of selfish or haughty, or kind of think highly of themselves, or not a team player, or other sorts of stuff. That's not a vibe you want to give. So showing your ability to be collaborative, to be inclusive, to making a point of connecting with people at your workplace, including peers and supervisors, and being respectful and warm and empathetic in those relationships, and kind of attending to the people side of things, not just the tasks and the projects. That can show your ability to be a good team player and a good colleague. And that includes doing your fair share of the work, being collaborative, helping other people participate in the work when that's appropriate, and being just conscientious in your relationships with those folks. Those kind of can help you seem like a good team player, which is another important quality, particularly since faculty. If you get into a PhD program, you might be on campus with them for 5 years, and that's a long time. Yeah, it's a long time to spend with that person. So they want to make sure you're a nice person and pleasant to be around. Classic phrases like somebody I'd want to be able to take on as an advisee, someone who I enjoy having a beer with on a Thursday happy hour night, something like that. So that kind of team playerness plays into kind of your being perceived as good interpersonally, a nice person. So those are some of the pieces about, those are some of the transferable skills that I think about that can be particularly relevant to the counseling psychology PhD context. And then there's also some field-specific skills, and I guess I mentioned some of those to some degree with the therapy stuff, like the active listening skills. Although those are useful for any occupation, they're certainly really key in counseling psych. But I think I might hold off on talking about some of the field-specific skills, particularly when it comes to the research side. I'll hold off on talking about those when I talk about how to get involved in research and what the purpose is and what competencies you're supposed to be picking up.